A while ago in a post, I asked you guys to give me your unpopular bookish opinions, your bookish hot takes, if you will. You guys delivered. Some of these are crazy. Some of them I can actually vibe with. I want to react to some of these, tell you what I think. It should be interesting. I'll just post them up on the screen somewhere over here. The first one is The Lies of Locke Lamora is just okay. I couldn't get fully invested in the plot. This one I have to hard disagree. This book was a damn near masterpiece for me. I've talked about it in some wrap-ups. I didn't do a dedicated review, but I was very, very high on this book. The writing was incredible. The story was really fun. The plot, Locke Lamora and Jean were such an amazing duo. Very, very gritty, very atmospheric, really cool Venetian, fantastical, historical setting. It was exactly what I wanted from that book at the time. And I remember putting it down and being shocked at just how well it delivered on everything for me. It was satisfying. The dialogue was really good. The relationships, the wit, and the dialogue specifically incredible. I don't think I could speak much more highly of it. I actually really liked it. And I know a lot of people feel the same way. A lot of people really like this one, but I also know where it can be split. There are some devices used in that book, and I think some of the time jumping or the flashbacks and stuff, some people couldn't quite get into. But in terms of the atmosphere, the imagery, you could smell the salt water. You could feel, the darkness in the back alleys and stuff. It's a heist story. It's fantasy, action-packed, really good pacing. I loved Locke Lamora. The next one is The Witcher series isn't as good as it's made out to be. I have to sort of agree with this one. I, like many of you, played the Witcher games. I played The Witcher 3 to start. I played a little bit of the first and second one going back before that, but really The Witcher 3 is still regarded as, to me, one of the best games ever made. And so I was thrilled when I realized that there were books. I sort of already knew that, but I was thrilled when I started getting into reading that this series was available to me and I could go and read some more of that story. And readers of the books may be a little disheartened to find out that the story doesn't really revolve around Geralt a whole lot, and we don't get a whole lot of him in the series the way the show and the games would have you believe. And the series sort of lost me as I got to book, I believe it was 4 or 5. I was halfway through that book. I really liked Ciri in the series. I liked the characters. I liked Geralt when he was around. The writing to me was actually quite good. A lot of people complain about the translation from, I believe it's Polish, but to me it was good. I liked it. And I'm much more of a developed or evolved fantasy reader now than when I first started those books like several years ago now. And so I don't know what I would think now, but I remember really enjoying them, particularly the first one. I believe it's called The Last Wish, and it's the short story collection. I loved that book. It was very good. I was very high on the series. It sort of lost me as things went on. And whenever I read a review with criticism of it, I can absolutely understand where people are coming from. So the Witcher series isn't as good as it is made out to be. I sort of have to agree with that. It didn't quite deliver the way that I expected it to, and maybe I was jaded from the game because I got to know the characters and the world in a specific context. And then the books are a little bit different. They're beautiful in their own right, and I still like them, but I would agree with this, that it's not quite as good as some of the fans make it sound. The next one is going to ruffle some feathers, man. Let's dissect this. Name of the Wind and Wheel of Time aren't good. The Wheel of Time I have not read yet. In fact, I have a lot of the hardcovers behind me. I have a wonderful signed copy of one that I found at a thrift store that I talked about recently. What an amazing find. I know what this series means to fantasy readers, and the effect it's had and the impact on the genre. Totally get it. But I've heard about the slog. I've heard about, some of the writing, some of the repetition, some of the maybe misogyny or the way that women are written, some of the descriptions and like the clothing or something like that. I think he dwells on a lot. So I've heard some of the nitpicky stuff, and I've heard the fact that it can feel a little bit derivative, at least at the beginning of Tolkien, maybe. I don't know. It's had its own impact. It's quite a classic at this point. It's had its own impact on the genre. I think we can call it its own thing. I've heard a lot of mixed things. And every time I try, I think about starting it because I definitely don't want my fantasy card revoked. I want to read it and I want to have lived that journey and know what people talk about when they talk about the series. And I want to feel, those moments. I want to know what they're talking about and why this is so highly regarded in the genre. But every time I go to start it, I'm put off by some of the mixed reviews. I'm put off by some of the reviews on the slog. If you don't know what the slog is like books, I don't know, 7 through 10 or 8 through 9 or 10 or 11 or whatever. There's a couple books around that latter third where it gets kind of slow and boring and it's a bit of a slog to get through. And I think the series overall is, I don't know, 14 books, 15 books, something like that. So it's not short. And all the books are fairly long too. So it's put me off from trying it. So I can't really speak to it, but I've heard a lot of mixed things. And so again, every time I try to think about picking it up or wanting to read it, I read something somewhere or watch something somewhere that makes me think, do I really want to invest my time on that? And this is one of those comments where like, maybe it's not worth the journey. Like maybe people are just nostalgic because they read it freaking years ago, and nostalgia is a hell of a drug. So I don't know. In terms of the Name of the Wind, now Name of the Wind, people like, it's revered. People love it. They say it's one of the best fantasy stories ever written. The prose is unrivaled. All this stuff. Patrick Rothfuss is a god. He's only written 2 books in the series, and there's an ongoing joke of like, we don't know when or if we will get the rest of them. That being said, I did read about half of Name of the Wind, and I actually have the anniversary edition, the beautiful copy. When I'm really invested in a book, when a book really hooks me, when I'm fully immersed, I continue reading. I have a really bad habit, and I think it's the way that I'm wired. I check out pretty quickly. I tend to put things down when I'm distracted, when I'm in a different mood, or when things just aren't grabbing me anymore. And so the fact that I didn't finish it, I'm trying to remember what happened. I think life got in the way. I put it down. I wasn't reading as much as I am now back then. I wasn't like a perpetual reader. I wasn't reading every day. And so I think if I were to pick this up again, I feel like I'd have a much different experience. This is one where I would like to pick this up, and I'm going to do a video at some point where I revisit some old DNFs. This was just a put down for now, never really got back to it. Not a hard DNF, but just I never really felt like going back to it, especially since it's not finished. What's the rush? Why the priority? But it's so beautiful to so many people and so beloved that I do want to revisit it, actually. So I can't speak to either one, but it says something about the fact that, you know, I didn't finish Name of the Wind. That might be a tell. Maybe I wasn't having a good time at the time. I can't remember. And yeah, Wheel of Time, I've heard that it's not as great as people make it out to seem. But then again, the wheelies will tell you it's one of the best ever written. So I wonder where you guys land on that. Anyway, the next one is, I don't think The Road is good at all. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is a hard disagree for me, and I can say that with conviction. I read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which was the only book that on Goodreads that I reviewed but didn't rate because I had no idea how I felt about it. Did I enjoy it? Did I not? It was beautiful, but it was crazy. Anyway, I don't know why I'm talking about Blood Meridian, but that was a crazy book, and I can tell, you know, I can understand why it would be split on that. But The Road was a dystopian, very bleak, very survivalist, and also heavily metaphoric story. And I was very touched and very moved by it. And it was hauntingly beautiful. And I did a dedicated review on that one, which goes to show how much I enjoyed it, because I don't always do a dedicated review for every book I read. I have to really have something to say for me to do a review. And that one was beautiful. And I get told often that for people that like book reviews and people that have watched my reviews, that's one of their favorites. I do a bit of a deep dive on what I think it means in terms of metaphor and the purpose behind the story, because it can be interpreted in a lot of ways. But yeah, that one I thought was beautiful. And I watched the movie a long time ago. I can't recall how I felt about it, but it's probably time for me to rewatch the movie. I don't think I'd ever reread the book because I just want to leave it there in my head the way that I experienced it the first time. But I do want to go back and rewatch the movie and see how that makes me feel about it. But I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was very poetic. He has a very weird writing style. Sometimes doesn't use punctuation. Sometimes doesn't use names, just refers to people as the man and the boy. That's a very common thing. And but the way he flows is very poetic in an artistically deliberate way. So it's weird writing, but it's very well done. So I would have to hard disagree with this one. I think The Road is an all-time for me. In fact, I believe it was on my top 10 books of all time list. So if you haven't watched that video, maybe check it out. I believe it's on there. This one is ridiculous. It's probably just trolling on here, and I know who wrote it, but of course we're keeping everything anonymous. It says, dragons are overrated. How dare you? How dare you? Dragons are not overrated. In fact, I have a bunch of books that I want to get to that have dragons in them. And I'm not like a huge dragon fan. I'm not just going to read something because it has dragons in it. But whenever dragons are in it and it's done well, I'm all about it. That's one of those mythical creatures. Those and like griffins and like, I don't know. There's a few creatures, mythical creatures that are griffins real? No, there are a couple mythical creatures that I really, really like in my books, and dragons can be very overdone. They can be super cringe, but when I see them and they're done well, they can be really cool. So I hard disagree. Dragons are not overrated. They're maybe overdone, but they're not overrated. They're always cool in some way. Okay, a fresh take on dwarves in fantasy never feels good to me. Either stay very traditional or don't do it at all. Ooh, that one's actually very interesting. A fresh take on dwarves. So I'm going to throw this out there too. I kind of agree. A fresh take on dwarves, elves, I don't know how I feel about it. I like the traditional stuff, and I don't often like the way that they're redone. When they're not the way that I imagine, or when they act different than I imagine, or if it just goes against the ingrained lore I have, historical fantasy lore that I have in my brain, it doesn't compute. Sometimes modern fantasy gets it right. A reimagining or like a fresh take on a historical fantasy element is always welcome to me, but there are certain things you can't really screw with. And like dwarves and elves and even like previously mentioned dragons and stuff, if you're gonna redo those or do a fresh take on those, you got to be super careful. Fantasy readers like what they like. There's a big risk in trying to redo some of this stuff. All right, another one. Not every book needs to be a 5-star read. Sometimes I want to read something entertaining with certain tropes, and it will probably not be a 5-star, and that is okay. I agree with this. This is a really good one because you need to just read what you want to read, and sometimes you reach for something for a specific reason, to scratch a certain itch. And a 5-star book doesn't always need to mean that it's the best written book. It has the best prose. It's structured in just the perfect way. It just needs to deliver on what sometimes you need to have a cathartic breakdown experience. Sometimes you need to have an existential crisis or go down the metaphor rabbit hole, or sometimes you just want a cozy, comfortable read, something easy. 5-star reads can be in every category, and within every category, there are ranges of what that might mean on any given day. So I really do agree. And that's the trouble with reviewing books or talking about books is it's art at the end of the day, and it is very, very much subjective. Beauty is an eye of the beholder. It is a very, very subjective thing. And when I say I've read a 5-star book, that means that, yes, objectively, I can point to stuff and say, like, this was very good relative to other things that I compare it to. But at the end of the day, it's my experience. And a 5-star read from me definitely, probably, maybe, most likely, possibly won't be a 5-star read for you. Another one is I am team no DNF, and I feel I can't say this online because a lot of people DNF. I'm one of those patient kinds of people that's always willing to read a whole book to judge it in its entirety. I'm not against people DNFing, but I just can't do it. I'm a completionist, and sometimes books give us what we're waiting for or looking forward to in the third act or final act. If a book sucked, then I always learn something about my taste and what works for me or not. I can DNF a series, but not a book. I'm not a completionist. I've given myself liberties to DNF. I put out a DNF video earlier, end of last year kind of thing. I kind of mentioned the risks, right? Pros and cons of DNFing, kind of the risks when you DNF. This person touched on it. A lot of authors are building to something, and sometimes you don't necessarily get what the author is intending if you don't see it through. But that being said, life is way too short to read something that you're not enjoying. So if you want to DNF, I would say go for it. You obviously understand the implicit sort of pitfalls of that. I've had a lot of experiences where, that last act really kind of seals the deal for me, and I'm glad I didn't put it down. But if you're like just not enjoying yourself, I don't know what why you have to keep going. I think DNFing is okay. If you're enjoying yourself, go for it. If you're not, you're allowed to DNF, like whatever. On that topic, I don't think people that DNF a book should give a rating. They should do a non-rated review and explain why the book did not work for them. Yes, I actually agree with that. I mean, unless there was something you can point to that was absolutely just not what you wanted, or, objectively not a good thing, which is, again, very difficult to do. This is a very subjective form of entertainment. Unless that's the case, I think you should probably refrain from rating it. A review is always helpful. I know a lot of authors, I'm friends with some of them. Constructive criticism is wanted, it's sought after, it's welcomed in most instances. But if you're going to rate a book 1 star and just not even give a reason, that's not great. I think if you're going to DNF, that's totally cool. Maybe have some respect and just try to give some constructive criticism. There's always something you can add. And if you have to DNF a book, maybe don't rate it, because it really does drive down the ratings. But then again, readers like me refer to those ratings as a gauge, as a temperature check on where does this rank among most reviewers? So we need some of those lower ratings and those higher ratings to give us a good grasp on where this might land on average. So there's a place for low ratings, but if you're DNFing one, especially early, that might be an instance to not rate a book. This one is, it says Dune Messiah is better structured than Dune. So I have the first 3 books in Dune, the first trilogy, and I haven't read the second 2. And I'm going to read them basically together. I've heard that the second 2, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, read better when you read them back to back. So I've read Dune and I really liked it. I'm surprised I liked it as much as I did. I truly am surprised that I liked such an antiquated, almost dry sci-fi book as much as I did. Because sci-fi is not my biggest, genre. I definitely read sci-fi, but it's not like what I gravitate to first. It's got to be a really kind of special sci-fi book or series, and it has to be recommended by some friends that I know and trust and that kind of stuff. I'm not a sci-fi first guy. So I haven't finished Dune Messiah or the next one, but I've heard that it gets better, and that whole trilogy as a package is better than just Dune. So in that regard, yeah, maybe the subsequent book gives you a lot of context for the first one, because I know it is different and things unravel and evolve and it becomes a much different story. I don't know if you like the next book more than Dune, but I'm not surprised that you say it's objectively potentially better. 50 Shades of Grey was marginally better than Twilight. I don't know. I haven't read 50 Shades of Grey and I haven't read Twilight. So maybe that is the case. I've always been curious to read 50 Shades of Grey. Do you remember when that was a big thing and everyone was reading Shades of Grey and people were blushing on the train to work, reading this stuff? Man, I wonder what that's about. I remember that there's a movie, never watched it, never had the desire to. My wife has read Twilight, and maybe I should see about 50 Shades of Grey. I don't know. Fiction books should not have a table of contents. Yeah, I mean, sure, why not? A table of contents that shows you what part and what chapter. Is that really necessary? I don't know how much value that adds. The Lord of the Rings is nigh on unreadable. Oh man. So this is a embarrassing admission. Some of you may know, I have never read through The Lord of the Rings. I've read The Hobbit. I think I read a little bit of The Fellowship of the Ring, the first one. Can't remember what it's called. But I haven't read that trilogy. I've been saving it and I have a really cool edition. So I've heard it's pretty antiquated at this point. It's again nostalgic. It's not as great as people make it out to be. People that read it later on in life go, why is this so great? Other people adore it. And other people that read it later in life go, how did I not read this when I was a kid, when I was younger? What a waste of time. I should have read this right away. Almost now for the last couple of years, I put it off because I'm afraid not to like it. I'm afraid to be on BookTube and have book friends and talk about stuff and not like Lord of the Rings. I'm scared about that. If you're asking me if I watched the movies, I actually didn't watch the movies. I think I watched them, to be honest. I watched the first one, yes. And I think I may have watched part of the second way back in the day, but no, I didn't watch all 3 of them. And I definitely didn't watch the Hobbit movies. If you're wondering if I know the story, yeah, I kind of know the story. I always told myself I'd want to read the books first, then catch up with the movies and really see why they're so amazing, cinematic masterpieces, and see the difference between them. I kind of want to watch the movies shortly after finishing the books. I never got to the books. It's so embarrassing. I'm so sorry. Feel free to unsubscribe. Gloss covers are better than matte covers. Gloss is boss. I like gloss covers, to be honest. And actually, a lot of my hardcovers, I put a Mylar plastic protective thing on the dust jacket. And I actually do that a lot of times because I like the way that the gloss looks. So I actually like glossy covers too. They're hard to show on screen and they kind of hurt the eyes in videos sometimes, but I really like glossy covers as well. So yeah, agree. Dune was boring. I've heard that. I've heard it's old. I've heard it's dry. I would disagree because I really enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. I think I gave it a surprising 5 stars for a number of reasons, but I can appreciate why someone might read it, especially not being like super into sci-fi maybe, or even if you are, I can appreciate how some people would have that criticism that it's a little boring. By today's standards, I'm reading Red Rising right now. By today's standards, even Sun Eater and stuff, and some of the series that people are talking about all over BookTube these days, like by today's standards, yeah, Dune might appear a little boring for sure. The Poppy War is overrated, flaming hot garbage. So, full disclosure, I bought all 3 books in paperback. It was like almost a BookTube darling. For a long time, people were talking about the Poppy War. Oh my God, yeah, Poppy War, whatever. And then it sort of did you notice that? It sort of shifted. And then all of a sudden, over the last couple of years, people were shitting all over the Poppy War and how like book 2 sucked. And then book 3 is even worse. And the main character is just like insufferable and she's just the worst. And the author just took a actual historical war and historical Asian events and made a story out of it with shitty characters. So I don't know where I land on that because I bought the first 3 in paperback and BookTube actually scared me away from reading these. It didn't scare me. I'm going to read whatever I want, whenever I want, but it made me feel, I went from having FOMO to being like, I almost don't want to waste my time. I really don't want to read something that I'm probably not going to like. So why waste my time? And the worst thing that can happen, in my opinion, is you read book 1 and it's all right. You try book 2 and it's okay, and then you read book 3, like none of them are good. The series isn't redeemed. As a package, it wasn't worth it. Life is too short. I'm getting old. I really don't want to spend time reading something I'm probably going to not like. So I just trusted my friends, trusted BookTube, and I just haven't gotten to that one yet. And because of all the sentiment, it's become very low priority. I like smelling books, bro. Me too. I don't know why. I go into bookstores way more often than I should. And I don't buy stuff just because like bookstores have that specific smell. And I love cracking a new book. Even an old book, like an old book you get from a thrift shop, sometimes, as long as they're not disgusting, they smell just booky. You know, book nerds will understand what we're talking about. The smell of books. Good times. I have to have new books. I can't have pre-owned, worn out books. I can definitely have old, used books. What I can't have is disgusting, discolored, dirty, grubby, manhandled, dog-eared books. If the covers are broken and, you know, stuff is folded, it's a hard pass for me. I can't. Like I'm a little bit OCD about that stuff. I can absolutely take a well-loved, worn, used copy, but it needs to be readable. It needs to look like it was somewhat cared for and stored on a shelf or something and not under the seat in the back of like a damp, leaky Honda Civic. You know what I mean? Sprayed edges are overrated. No, they're not overrated. They're cool. They're maybe overrated, but they're still kind of cool. And when I have them, I like them. I don't necessarily seek them out. And sometimes they're done kind of plain, kind of boring, kind of ugly. But when they're done right, oh man, sprayed edges are kind of a cool touch. Romantasy is real fantasy. You know what? Sure. I don't disagree with that. I think Romantasy has become its own thing, which is fine. It doesn't mean that it's not real fantasy, but it definitely leans into the romance stuff, often the smutty stuff, which is totally cool. And for people that love that stuff and love fantasy, it's a perfect little mesh, perfect little baby to have and read. And it's a really good combo for them. It also depends on what you consider real fantasy. This is a bit dangerous because someone's real fantasy might not be someone else's real fantasy. There's always going to be someone to argue. So yeah, I don't know. That's more of a subjective thing. The final one is written by someone who I know very, very well. And I just want to say, how dare you? You know, how dare you? Stephen King is overrated. I know this person has read a couple Stephen King books now, and they are within their right at this point to make an informed opinion. I will say that. But it doesn't work for everyone. Stephen King does not work for everyone. And it's really weird because he's spread among so many genres. And it's just like, if you feel like a thriller or a mystery or a horror book or a coming of age book or a whatever, like or fantasy, right? He has something in every little genre. He has something in every normal sized genre. It's kind of hard because if you don't necessarily pick up the right Stephen King book, you may not have a good experience. A lot of people say that he's a pretty good writer, but they will also probably say and admit, a lot of people, that he puts things in his books that don't often need to be there. Political stuff, some sex stuff, or bad language from that he probably should have outgrew long ago. So there are definitely criticisms. I think Stephen King as an author, I mean, you can't take away all of his sales and, awards and accreditations and all that stuff. I mean, he is very popular, and being popular doesn't mean that you are good. That is definitely not the case. But I've had enough experience with King where he's definitely a favorite, and he lands with me more often than not. Stephen King may be overrated to some, but I feel like he's probably pretty accurately rated to the majority of people. So anyway, I appreciate everyone sending those in. It was fun to read through those, refresh my memory, react to some of those, give you my opinion. If you have any other unpopular opinions, bookish hot takes, whatever, leave them in the comments below. I will see you there. We'll talk about all of them down below. And that is it for me, guys. Thanks for sticking around. I'll catch you guys real soon on the next video.